People who love big government keep saying that.
Yes, we can!
Yes, we can!
And I think they're right. We can. But we disagree about the word we. By we, they mean government.
Yes, we can!
Yes, we can.
It's a fatal conceit. The politicians in there think they can run our economy, run our lives. But no, they can't.
Government can't even keep escalators working in the nation's capital.
1 out of 8 escalators is out of service at all times.
At this anti-Glenn Beck rally, some protesters said, government is awesome. But then they got a taste of government management.
When the brakes stopped working on this escalator,
Government can't balance its budget, educate children, or nation build. At least this politician understands that.
We're not doing such a good job being government these days.
Ron Paul joins us tonight, along with Sarah Palin and others who understand that we can in America if we means you and I, pursuing our own interests.
No, they can't.
Not at the point of a gun or under duress of law, but voluntarily. Free people, volunteering, pursuing profit, enjoying the freedom that made America great. That's what my new book's about. Why government fails, but individuals succeed. And that's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
Okay, let me just say it right here at the top of the show. This is my new book. It's called No, They Can't, and you should buy it. It feels a little creepy promoting my own book like that, but hey, it's the free market thing to do, right? And I and my staff worked hard on it, and we bring up important ideas, we think, so it's worth your spending your time and money on it. Besides, I've been watching this program called The O'Reilly Factor, which I'm told is a successful TV show, and I could never promote this as often he promotes his stuff. So here it is, out just this week. Why government fails, but individuals succeed. And tonight we're going to talk about that, first with Sarah Palin. So, Sarah, you're a government person. How did you learn that?
Oh, heaven forbid you call me a government person. Ugh. And by the way, I've got your book too, and I dog-eared the heck out of it last night as I flew cross-country from New York back to Alaska. Excellent book. It really got me excited about some solutions that at least you, John, espouse, and more voters need to kind of get a hold of this idea that no, government isn't the solution. Like Reagan said, government too often is the problem. And I want to argue with you on one point, though, that you made specifically in the book, and hopefully we'll get to that. But in the meantime, I'll tell you, the examples that you give throughout this book really shed light on how nonsensical government is in assuming that its role is way beyond what our Constitution allows, especially federal centralized government to be.
And the people you were hanging around with this week on the Today Show, all those socialists, they have no clue about these ideas.
You know what? This is all our fault, though, John. As long as we continue as voters to keep sending people to Washington, D.C., these yahoos who basically are just promising to bring home more of the bacon for their districts, for their congressional areas, then we have no one to blame but us as voters. I know up here in Alaska, specifically, that has been campaign promises by our congressional delegation is they'd bring home more bacon than the next guy, and we keep voting them back into office.
And Alaska is an unusually libertarian state, at least compared to the other states. And you've been sympathetic to Ron Paul and some of these libertarian ideas. Does that include things like drug legalization, legalization of sex work, prostitution for adults?
Well, first, when we just talk about the fiscal issues, let me give you an example of up here in Alaska. When I put the kibosh on the bridge to nowhere when I was the governor, I was publicly chewed out by our congressional delegation, by the delegation letting the press know, and then the press let voters know, that I was going to make their job more difficult in bringing home more money to Alaska. And of course, I was trying to make the point, but you know, our country's going to be insolvent, and the federal government won't have money to share with Alaska. Alaska if we keep going down the road that we're going. Accumulating debt to the tune of $3 million a minute now, that's where we are, John. We're not going to be able to sustain this.
$3 million a minute is a good, clear way to make people think about it. But you didn't answer my question on the more uncomfortable social issues. Drugs, prostitution.
Well, yeah, and you take even more of a stronger libertarian view than I do on some of those issues, like the war on drugs. I happen to believe that we need to continue to do all that we can to discourage drug use, especially with our youth. I would like to see, though, law enforcement prioritize its time and resources and not go out and bust a guy in his house, maybe smoking a joint, who's not doing anybody else any harm, and in the meantime go out and find the bad guys and try to help keep society safe that way. Just prioritize, use common sense.
All right, I'm dropping that and moving to something where we agree, I think. You're a hunter. I don't know if you got to the part of the book where we talk about if you want to save tigers, eat them, which isn't exactly true, but it's been shown that these conservation efforts have not worked. Tigers are disappearing in Asia, but where people are allowed to own tigers, to have the tribe controlling those tigers to allow tourism or even hunting, then the local people work to fight the poachers and preserve the animals. Do you agree with that?
You had really good points in that chapter about conservation, and you gave the good example about the bison also, once such an endangered species, and now once we were able to privatize basically the management of that species, they are now, relatively speaking, in abundance. But this is the point that I did want to argue a little bit, because as a commercial fisherman, what I have seen firsthand is, for instance, Japanese trawlers coming in and pretty much raping the bottom of the ocean floor before there was strict regulation on overfishing, and these Japanese trawlers with 20-mile-long nets being able to overfish and then waste the bycatch. The rest of us, as commercial fishermen, we'd sit there saying, well, pretty soon there is not going to be a species left for us to help feed the rest of the world. So how is it, John, and no doubt you have the answer, how can government manage for sustainability and for abundance for future use of a commonly held resource like fisheries?
Well, it's a problem, and that's why we call it the tragedy of the commons. When nobody owns it, everybody takes as much as they can get, and the only way is somehow to give people some sort of ownership right over this part of the ocean or this many fish. And my understanding is it's been done with lobsters, but it's tougher in the ocean with fish that cover big distances.
Then we have to make sure that government has some appropriate resource then to manage until, we figure out a better way to get people to not abuse a resource or abuse the environment. How is it that we're going to allow government to efficiently use a limited resource that we have, that's tax dollars? We do that by electing people who will engage in common sense and quit wasting money on all these other frivolous, some over aspects, which I'd say is about 90% of what the federal government is engaged in.
Governor Palin, thanks for joining us. Thanks for reading my book.
It's an excellent book. It really is. Just let me sum up real quick, though. One sentence that you wrote in here that people need to understand is that your intuition tempts us all to believe that politicians will eventually wise up and come up with a reasonable budget so that America won't go broke. But what reality teaches us, as you pointed out, John, is that the government's budget really has little to do with bookkeeping, cost-benefit analysis, reality, or even sanity. We've got to change that, John, or we're going under.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Palin, and I sure hope we change it.
Thank you.
The ideas in this book took shape over the past 20 years or so, and one person who helped those ideas take shape was David Bose of the Cato Institute. So, to be a narcissist, how's my book?
It's a great book, John. There are stories in there that even people who are well-read, if they haven't been watching all of your shows for 20 years, will find new things that they do better in Canada than they do in the United States. The chart you have on OSHA and how Workplace accidents were falling before we passed the OSHA law. They continued falling after we passed it. You can't tell any difference.
Yeah, we'll put that up. They used to say, look, OSHA saved all these workers, and the line goes straight down. Then a researcher looks at the line before OSHA. Slope of the line is about the same.
So there are a lot of very interesting facts and pieces of analysis in there like that. And also your theme, as Sarah Palin was just talking about intuition. Our intuition so often leads us astray in thinking about economics and politics and what government does.
And a big one is planning. It's intuitive that life is better if it's planned. And President Obama's so smart. People in D.C. seem to be so smart. They should plan for us.
That's right. There is a general sense that in our own lives we need to plan. You can't put together a TV show without a lot of planning. You can't put together the Apple Computer Company without a lot of planning. And yet, when the government tries to plan, when it tries to plan for the whole society, that's too centralized. There's not enough room for competition for individual choice. And it's people planning with their own money to achieve their own purposes. And you see it even with Sarah Palin, who's somebody who clearly has some libertarian instincts. And yet, when she sees a problem like overfishing, her immediate intuition is government needs to come up with a plan to prevent this overfishing. Maybe the problem is that in the fishing area, we don't sufficiently rely on property rights and markets. And it might be difficult to figure out how to use property rights with ocean resources, but that's the way we should be thinking.
Let's move on to the minimum wage, another place where intuition says, help poor people, help low-wage workers have a minimum wage.
The intuition is so obvious there. There are people who don't make enough money to support their families. So why not have a law saying everybody who works 40 hours a week should make enough to support their family? That seems pretty obvious. If you learn to think like an economist, though, you begin to realize if you set the price of something higher than it's actually worth, your book is great. But if the government set a minimum price of $100 on that book, you would not sell many copies.
Intuition says tariffs will protect American workers.
That's right. Intuition says, hey, Americans are out of work. Why don't we just only buy American computers and American cars? That seems perfectly obvious. What we know, though, from economic analysis is if you do that, then American companies will be protected from competition. They will get lazy and sloppy, like Detroit automobile companies did in the 50s and 60s when they dominated the world. And people will get worse services, they'll get less innovation, they'll get less competition, things will cost more, and we'll all end up with fewer services, fewer goods, and fewer jobs.
And less wealth. Now, you're executive vice president of the Cato Institute, the premier libertarian organization in America. So let me throw this quote from Van Jones at you about libertarians. They say they're patriots, but they hate everybody in the country who looks like us. They hate the people, the brown folk, the gays, the lesbians, the people with piercings. There is this attitude that to be libertarian is to be cruel to minorities.
Well, I think that's just silly. I mean, in the first place, a lot of libertarians are minorities. In the second place, libertarian organizations support treating people as individuals. It was people with libertarian ideas who led abolitionist crusades, who fought for women's rights, who fought for gay rights when that was beginning. In all of these areas, Van Jones is just wrong. He doesn't understand what individualism is.
Thank you, David Bose. Coming up, presidential candidate Ron Paul. But first, with the exception of Ron Paul, politicians who stay in office a long time tend to vote to spend more and expand government more. When we return, a plan for the bums out.